Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss the latest analysis of UK trade data, which has concluded that British exports continue to lag behind all of the G7 economies. Evidence say economists that Brexit continues to be affecting us. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. If the government would like to stop self-imploding for a moment, shall we get on to Brexit? See, what's this, you may ask? I keep seeing loudmouths on Twitter saying that our exports are doing great. In fact, they frequently quote the Office for National Statistics when showing that our exports have never been better. The ONS wouldn't lie to us, would it? Indeed, no. But the ONS have also not said that our exports have never been better. In fact, they are quite clear that unless otherwise stated, their trade data does not take inflation into account. As I've demonstrated in multiple videos over the Brexit period, once you take inflation into account, the value of our exports is down. So, in fact, the volume of our exports, which is a much better measure, are down. Our exports to the EU are down. Our exports to the rest of the world are down. Our exports are down. As the wits on Twitter are noting, perhaps we're sick of exports. Additionally, the Office for National Statistics mentions that the way they collect trade data changed in 2021 due to leaving the customs union single market. So it is actually more difficult to carry out very detailed comparisons with previous years. You can do, napkin math sort of thing. Fortunately, there are economists who put in the time to work through all the data, producing analyses of the sort we've had published this week. I certainly don't have time to do all of this. The latest august group of financial analysts to make clear that UK exports of goods are not doing well is the Financial Times. Go on, try to dismiss the Financial Times as Marxist ne'er-do-wells. In fact, the FT article which presented this sobering analysis noted that the Office for Budgetary Responsibility said that they expect exports to be weak for the next 2 years. Now, let us make sure we understand what this statement means, because some may think, oh, so we're going to have a couple more years of poor exports and then it'll clear up. Well, that's okay. We sort of understood that Brexit would cause a few issues. I know we said before Brexit that the day after it would all be wonderful. But actually, on sober reflection, we sort of got the idea that, yeah, we'll have a few years of difficulty, but then it's the sunlit uplands. Resolve itself after a few years? Absolutely, yes, no problem. No, that's not what the statement means. What it means is that the real terms value of our exports right now is lower than in 2019, the last year before we left the EU. It means that this will continue for another 2 years. What the Office for Budgetary Responsibility is saying is that after another 2 years, we should see exports worth more in real terms, in actual real terms, taking inflation into account, than before Brexit. However, and this is important, when that happens, it doesn't mean that it's fine, because it will still be lower than it would have been without Brexit. And that will always remain the case. That goes well beyond another couple of years. Simple enough to understand, with Brexit, we created a situation whereby anybody wanting to export goods from Britain to the EU has to arrange and pay for lots of paperwork and certification, as well as send it via transport routes which now take longer and for which we have fewer lorry drivers willing to do it. That makes all of our goods less competitive in the EU. It's obvious. It costs more to trade, so the value of our trade goes down. It doesn't punish some types of goods but help others. It punishes them all. Of course, that's going to hurt exports. It's always going to hurt exports, and the Brexiteers know it as well. Ask yourself why the same Brexiteers who are trying to claim that the trade barriers we erected with the EU are not harmful to trade, but then they claim that getting better trade deals with other countries improves our trade because we're lowering trade barriers, aren't we? Of course we're going to improve our trade. But we've just raised trade barriers with the EU. How are you saying that our trade's better with that? Make your mind up. Make your mind up. Either trade barriers are a problem for trade or they are not. Don't trust anyone who tries to be selective about this. But this theory is all well and good. How will we be able to tell? Because again, this is another thing they'll try and play on. If we say, the trade figures are certain, like in a couple of years' time, they'll be above the 2019 levels. And I can say, more importantly, economies can say it is lower than it would have been without Brexit. Well, how can you? Are you going to show me this parallel universe where we didn't leave then? How do you know? How do we know that our overall level of exports will still be lower than if we'd not left the EU, when we can only see the trade data for one reality? How do we test it out? Easy. What a serious analyst will do is to chart the value of exports in real terms for all G7 countries from 2019 up until the latest data. Bear in mind, it takes pretty much a full year to get the full trade data, so it's always going to take an extra year. So if the OBR say that 2 more years of sub-Brexit exports, then it might be above that level then. That means we need to wait another basically 4 years to put it to the test, unfortunately. But you could look at the value of exports since 2019 for all G7 countries, see how the UK compares to the rest. What we are likely to see is that the UK looks like a bottom feeder on that graph. What the Brexiteers will want to show is the raw value of exports, not compared to any other country and not taking inflation into account. The next dodge they will attempt is to use trade data which includes precious metals. Now, whenever you read the ONS reports, they sort of tend to make mention of this, as does the Financial Times in this analysis. See, the graph, they've put two plots for the UK on this graph, one with and one without exports of precious metals. And you always use the one without, which is that one at the bottom. And the reason for this is twofold, because there'll be people going, oh no, you can't just cut things out, Yeah, there is a reason why we can in this case. First, it's not actually trade. These commodities are just passing into the UK, then leaving again. There's no actual trade going on. Nobody's buying and selling them, but they have to be included in the figures because they have a value when they're leaving the country. But the value doesn't impact our economy because no one's buying them and then reselling them. Second, other countries don't waste their time with this. So for a proper comparison, you actually don't include them because no one else does. The ONS knows this. They make mention of it. The Financial Times knows this. We can already see from the graph where the valid UK line is in red that before Brexit, we were mixing it with, because they, in fact, they go back to 2016 on this chart. They put the baseline at 2016. But if you look at 2019, we were still in the single market. Everyone went down with COVID, but then our recovery was so much weaker. In fact, ever since the COVID recovery took place, we have been stuck right at the bottom. If you look at, if you did comparisons like this of the G7 pre-Brexit, people go up and down. Occasionally the UK was at the top and then it would come down again. Italy would go to the top and come down again. The USA would go to the top and come down again. We all, as G7 nations, used to mix it up. But now the UK is firmly at the bottom and with clear daylight emerging between ourselves and even the worst performing of the rest. In fact, the spread amongst all G7 nations is quite remarkable, really. But you look at this graph and you see that we were performing as well or as badly as all the rest right up until Brexit. The graph shows gains and losses, and that fluctuation will always occur. But where the fluctuation used to see different G7 nations taking place in the leaderboard, we are now firmly in the wooden spoon position. We are now to the G7 GDP what Italy is to the Six Nations. Ironically, Italy is kicking ass in this particular GDP growth race. So when the Brexit loons bang on about the UK having had the highest growth in the G7 last year, ask them why our goods exports remain so poor. GDP growth calculations are only comparing your economy with your economy. It's not compared with anyone else. The way to compare it to others is use a common baseline and see where it is now. In this case, the baseline chosen was halfway through 2016, which is when the Brexit referendum took place. It shows that the decision itself didn't impact exports because we were still mixing it up with it. So actually, it was only leaving the single market and customs union that caused that. You know, this analysis is really grim. Previous ones that I've seen show that the UK is the only G7 nation to not have grown its economy above the 2019 baseline. This one is not GDP, this is just goods exports. But it shows that those goods exports We are the only G7 member not to have even grown above the 2016 level. Every G7 nation has grown their volume of goods exports above their 2016 level, with Italy and Japan increasing theirs by over 20% since then. The UK is still below it. In real terms, in terms of goods exports, we're below 2016. You know, just like all the rest, it sank with COVID. Like all the rest, then, you know, they recovered. In fact, the rest recovered and had completed that recovery by the end of 2020. We were still behind. We are still behind now. Think about that. The rest of the G7 went above their 2016 level before. We all went up above the 2016 level in 2017, 18 and 19, all of us. Then we all crashed with COVID. Everyone else got back up to that 2016 level by the end of the first year of the pandemic, 2020. It's 2023 and we are still not there. But when we finally do poke our head above that baseline, and really, as I say, the baseline wants to be 2019, because there was trade growth in 2016, 17 and 18. 2019 was the last one where we were in the customs union single market and COVID wasn't making a monkey of things. When we finally do poke our head above that baseline, it looks certain that we will still be in last place. Unless one of the other G7 nations does something spectacularly stupid. And we will continue to be in last place. There will be no more of that mixing it up with the rest. Sometimes one goes high, sometimes low. Any government, until any government decides to do something about this. And the only thing to do about it is lower Brexit red tape, lower trade barriers. If you want to sell more, make it easier to sell. Finally, another thing you often see on the ONS reports is the way data is collected changed in 2021. This is due to the nature of our exit in the single market and customs union, but not the whole UK did it in the same way. So you have to watch out for inconsistencies related to that as well, something Brexiteers aren't interested in doing. But this other graph from the FT analysis does just that. The grey band is all the other 6 members of the G7. The pink line is the UK, but the blue line is how the UK data really looks when you take into account those differences in data collection. You know, and that's what I certainly don't have the time to do. And thank goodness for people doing so and presenting it. The pink line from that point counts some trade data twice, basically. You know, this graph is for overall trade volumes, not just exports, overall trade volumes. Even this is weak. In fact, the suggestion in the analysis is that this weakening of trade happened more quickly than was initially expected. Essentially, Brexit hit faster than experts thought it would. Ironically, COVID and the war in Ukraine are providing useful cover for the Brexiteers, but what it's hiding is greater Brexit damage than people thought would occur in some ways. And we thought it was going to be bad enough as it was. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.